I also invite you to put in the chat box what butterfly species you've seen so far, and we'll make a bit of a survey from your results. And I'd also like to know, so we can just tailor this meeting because it is very much your meeting. But to tailor it to you, if you're having any difficulty with any particular group of species, usually the whites is the most common one, which we're going to cover at the very end. Um, please put it in the chat box, please. So the headlines. I couldn't resist this article about the migration of the monarch butterfly, and it's a great little story about flight MW005, and this here is actually the butterfly involved, and you can see on its thorax a little tiny transmitter, and on that transmitter at the top of it you'll see that is a solar cell, believe it or not. It also has a battery, so it continues to run all the time, even if there's no sunshine. And this little chap started life right up near Oklahoma, and around about September, I think the 24th, and traveled down to approaching the Gulf of Mexico. And then they lost it. It was about the late September. And then they found it again in December the 2nd. It turned up in the overwintering grounds, which is just to the west of Mexico City. And how it works is it crowdsources. It's amazing, really. So you may be aware that if your phone has Bluetooth on it, then every time you come near a mobile phone with Bluetooth, that address of this transmitter will show on that device. It just does it automatically, and if your service provider allows, then that is relayed to whoever is responsible. So this would be relayed back to Xerxes and picked up by them, so you can actually track all the path of the butterfly. I wouldn't have thought this was at all possible, even in this day and age, but it is. So this little transmitter weighs 0.05 of a gram compared with the butterfly itself weighing zero point 0.5 of a gram. And during its trip this spring, it's traveled already 1,500 miles. And you can see some of the latest dates here. So it flew up from Mexico's, the overwintering grounds in Mexico, are around about the end of February, started making progress slowly. And then here you see it actually crossed the Rio Grande into the United States and then progressed up. I forget the name of these states. Alabama, I know, is in there, making its way to Mississippi. And it stopped. It stopped. Its last result was March the 21st, and it was just outside Memphis. What a remarkable device, and what a remarkable butterfly. So I thought that would be a good starter, because there's a lot of remarkable things tonight, I think. But first, thinking of the headlines this year, Big Butterfly Count, you may remember. The director of it, Richard Fox, the head of science at Butterfly, wasn't really very optimistic and warm. We may feel like we've seen a lot of butterflies this summer, but that's only because last year was so awful. Do you think that's true? Be interested in your views. Also, apparently, this year, according to their figures, which I carefully studied, six of the species that they monitored had their best results so far. They included the small copper, large white, small white, brimstone, gatekeeper, comma, and the red admiral had its second best year. That's more in tune with my observation. So was it really average? We will see. Butterfly Conservation also launching a new thing, as well as the big butterfly count, and that's Britain's favourite butterfly, where you vote for your favourite species. That's happening in the middle of May to the 7th of June, so 3 weeks covering that period. It makes me wonder, though, because that period is there's quite often there's not a huge amount of butterflies around. So I wondered what they're doing there. I couldn't resist this one either. You're probably aware it's been a lot of coronal eruptions and the lights in the sky. And this was a particular one in August, which was butterfly shaped, which I thought was rather wonderful. And the reason I put it in also was this: you can often pick out the sun has these big peaks, and when there's huge coronal eruptions, is usually when the sun is at its peak activity. And quite often during those spells, you get hotter weather or hotter. It's not exact. And the sun is on an 11-year cycle. And if you look at our records, you can quite often pick out 11-year cycles. The other hot news is we have a new species reached the UK, which we're going to cover in some depth. And also we have an extinct one has now become resident again. But again, lots of that later. So I'm going to hand now to Sian for her piece on the blueprint for nature recovery.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share some of the work that the Trust has developed with you tonight. Hopefully you'll see some of its relevance and how the butterfly transects and all the work that you're doing are contributing to the big picture, which I hope to share with you tonight. So hopefully many of you will recall a few years ago, the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust published the State of Yorkshire's Nature. And this showed just how important Yorkshire is for British biodiversity. Yorkshire hosts around 2/3 of all British non-microbial species and supports other threatened and stronghold species and habitats. Interestingly, we also are home to 2/3 of the British butterfly species. However, Yorkshire's nature is under threat. We've lost nearly 2,000 species over the last couple of 100 years, and many continue to be in decline. About 30% of Yorkshire's butterflies are now threatened with extinction. And also, our nature network is too few, too small, and too scattered to form a healthy and resilient ecological network. And we're seeing these trends globally. The published research shows that to halt and reverse the declines that we're seeing, a minimum of 30% of land positively managed for nature is needed. And as such, the global 30 by 30 target, which involves protecting and managing 30% of land and sea, as Nick said, for nature by 2030, was adopted at an international global biodiversity framework. Nearly 200 nations have signed up to this legally binding target, including the UK government, and it now forms the foundation of the government's nature recovery ambitions. So this is an international target. The government has adopted it as a national target, but for us to see it come to fruition, we will need to deliver it locally. So we started to think, what could 30 by 30 look like for Yorkshire? Where would we be starting from? You know, what's the percentage already? And how could we make up the remaining percentage? So we looked at government policies, we used our State of Yorkshire's nature data, we drew upon established conservation principles such as the Lawton principles of more, bigger, better, and joined up habitats. And we came up with a blueprint of 7 opportunities to bring nature's recovery back in Yorkshire. And you can see those 7 opportunities presented here in our Yorkshire Rose. They're based around the protected area network, the national protected landscapes like national parks and national landscapes, large scale areas for nature, how we reconnect all of those sites, how we restore our threatened species, and also how we engage people within that process. So if I start with opportunity 1, this is all about building the core of our nature network, having that resilient backbone that we can build all the other sites around. This is concentrating on our statutory protected sites, like our sites of special scientific interest, the triple SIs. And, you know, some of you are already doing your transects in these sites. You know how important they are. We've got a photo of Brockerdale here, which supports a diversity of butterfly species. Our triple SIs actually cover 11% of Yorkshire's land area. So this is a really great place to start from. But we need to make sure that these systems are well monitored. We need to make sure that they're managed well so that they are as healthy and robust as possible. We can then, in opportunity 2, add to those triple SIs with the non-statutory protected sites. They tend to be the local wildlife sites and land which is owned and managed by non-government organisations such as the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, RSPB, National Trust, etc. And it also includes sites with irreplaceable habitats such as ancient woodland, and you can see Hetshire Wood here in the photo. These non-statutory sites add another 4% to our nature network. So we're already at the halfway mark. Our key is to make sure that these sites are really healthy and managed well. And we'd like to add to them in the future. The national parks, the national landscapes are also positioned really well to be a major contributor. And this is because of the large land extent that they cover and also the diversity of habitats and species that they cover. In Yorkshire, our national parks and national landscapes currently cover 28% of our land area. And you can see them shown here in the orange. You can see how well they consolidate that protected area network. Of course, not all of this land will be managed for wildlife, but there are opportunities to add some extra percentage to our total as we move along if we start to shift some of those spaces into nature positive and managed land. And we also have the proposed Yorkshire Wolds, which is shown here in the blue, which is a new national landscape, which is going through the process of being designated, we hope. And this could offer another huge area. It's particularly important because it's on the chalk, and also we know that those limestone habitats are also really important for butterflies. Opportunity 4 starts to look at the really large scale areas that we can be delivering through organisations which own large areas of land, such as Yorkshire Water. They also include things like our peat restoration program, which is not only restoring peat, but also biodiverse, enables enhancements in biodiversity. And we also have landscape recovery schemes, of which the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust is involved in 3 in the Yorkshire Dales. Again, I mentioned the limestone habitats. You can see the limestone pavement here. These habitats are just so important for butterflies. And recently, we've just had some of the local nature recovery strategies published. We had the one over in the Hull and East Yorkshire area, as well as the North Yorkshire. And just in the last week, we've had West Yorkshire local nature recovery strategies published, which actually show on the ground opportunities for adopting nature recovery measures. Opportunity 5 then starts to connect that network that I've already presented through stepping stones and corridors. This is where we start to think about our hedgerows, our road verges, watercourses and that riparian strip, gardens and ponds and parks and green spaces in urban areas. We're starting from a really fantastic foundation. We already have over 38,000 kilometres of hedgerows across Yorkshire. We have over 6,500 kilometres of streams and rivers. again, we want to make sure that these are managed well and in really healthy conditions so that they can support the biodiversity that we need them to. I've also included a map of the bee lines across Yorkshire. These areas provide habitat corridors, providing interconnected network of wildlife-rich habitat. They create insect superhighways across the landscape. They're particularly important because they allow butterflies to move freely between habitats and so that they can feed and breed. And you can see those numbers there. They're the number of projects along those corridors that are already established and helping to build this network. So these first opportunities, I mentioned the protected landscapes, they get us to about the halfway mark. We have the national landscapes offering more. If we start to build in the large scale areas of the peat programs, the landscape recovery schemes, etc., we can add another 9%. And through these stepping stones and corridors that I've just described for opportunity 5, we can get to the 30% mark and even exceed it, which is absolutely fantastic. Many of these habitat improvements will support many species across Yorkshire, but there will be some that require specific interventions that we need to really think about. You know, there'll be species that we want to bring back from extinction. There'll be species which are really rare and threatened now, such as the lady slipper orchid, which you can see in this photo, we're looking to reintroduce, well, we are reintroducing some of these plants. We want to be thinking about ecosystem engineers such as beavers and the good work that they can be doing and just having another wonderful species in our landscape. We also want to be thinking about how we help the specialists and the iconic species. You know, could we be thinking about pine marten across the north of Yorkshire? And we also want to be thinking about those species which are on the move that are changing their distributions because of climate change. And we have a photo of, its name escapes me, Clifton Nonpareil,
Correct.
and also, so, thank you, Nick, you could have jumped in. And also, it's super important that we also are monitoring these sites and understanding how we're making our progress towards our 30% target. And this is also an important part of where you all come in. So our final opportunity looks to people power. We can't achieve those first 6 opportunities without the power of people and all of the amazing work that's done. We're super lucky because surveys have found that 70% of people are aware of the threat to biodiversity and they're concerned about the losses that they're seeing. It's probably not surprising that in a recent survey of 8 different countries, 82% of people were in support of the 30 by 30 targets. We want to make sure that people have access to nature. Only 1 in 3 people in Yorkshire are within easy access of a park, woodland, river, or natural space, and that means within 15-minute walk. And there are also huge opportunities around people's gardens, you know, the amazing things that they can be doing. And when we put all of that together, the collective action can be truly significant. So those are the 7 opportunities. They focus on this, you know, high quality 30%, but the remaining 70% will also nest and protect and support that 30%. We want that to be healthy as well. Nearly 3/4 of Yorkshire is under agricultural management. The operations around farming are super important. We have huge opportunities around the urban and suburban areas. This covers about 10% of Yorkshire. And also we want to be thinking about how other government organisations and local councils, etc., can be contributing if they were to contribute, you know, 30% of their land. So just in closing, by integrating these 7 opportunities into a multi-functioning landscape where we have space for nature, we also have space for housing, farming, transport, infrastructure, etc., we can create wild and thriving Yorkshire for people and nature. We've demonstrated that through these 7 opportunities, that 30% is possible for Yorkshire. But now we must supercharge our efforts. We've been speaking with multiple stakeholders across Yorkshire about this plan, and people are really excited, from the government to other environmental organisations to farmers and residents. We're building a coalition to deliver 30% for Yorkshire. All contributions are important, from the ground action to creating and managing these habitats, right through to the monitoring work and understanding the excellent progress that we're making and what the status of the species are that you are all contributing. We're very grateful for all that you're doing and hope that you will feel part of this bigger picture to achieve our ambition of a 30 by 30 for Yorkshire. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. So, all of us collect an awful lot of data, and we don't always realize how important it is and what happens to it. Um, and we collect, it's huge, the amount. Um, I was trying to figure out something like 100,000 records come from you, our recorders, every year. It's amazing how much work you do. Um, and then, of course, we want to know how we use that data to make some kind of assessment of the status of a species. And that can be tricky because there's two methods of um, looking at species. One is occurrence, and the other is abundance. Now, occurrence is what we otherwise known as a casual sighting, is you see a butterfly in a particular location and you put it on iRecord or our very popular sightings page on our website, which has been incredibly popular this year. And the other method we have is to measure the abundance. It's very different. We measure very systematically by doing a transect walk once per week throughout from 1st of April right through to the end of September. It gives us a full picture in a very systematic way of what's happening. This method is called the Polar Walk. You're all familiar with it, but it's always worth thinking exactly what we're doing. So we're walking in this imaginary cube, 5 meter cube in front of us, 2.5 meters one way, 2.5 meters the other way. So around about 4 strides in both directions. Um, and we can only do it when the temperature is above 13 degrees C and it's sunny because we need the insects to be mobile and flying. And this, by doing it this way, the data that we collect is highly reproducible. And I can confirm, having walked behind a couple of our walkers, that and counting butterflies, I get the same number of butterflies as they do within one or two insects, which is remarkably reproducible. That's what makes it so incredibly powerful. So across the UK, we have 2,627 UK BMS transects this year, of which Yorkshire contributes 116. We also have the wider countryside scheme, which I know some of you um, contribute to. I can see Ginny there on our call, um, and hi Ginny. Um, this is a light, it's sort of a light version of Transect. You do a minimum of 2 walks in um, June and July, and then the BC extrapolate from that what's present on that transect. Also in the UK, we do 10 single species transects. This is for things like particularly northern brown owl argus, and also there's another species. Oh, the large heath, of course, which is on thorn moors. And also there's another one of which we have one transect. That's a purple hair streak transect, which is actually visiting 5 trees in an evening. So between 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the evening, you go to 5 trees and you spend 1 minute looking towards the top of that tree, and counting how many insects you can see. Obviously, it has to be in the flight period, so you're talking in the middle of July. That's what the UK looks like. We have extraordinarily good coverage. There is no other survey in the world that comes close to what UK BMS is achieving in terms of coverage. Obviously, there's some gaps, and even in Yorkshire, we have some gaps, and I'll show you later on what that looks like. And as Sean was talking about, these all go into biodiversity indicators. The latest version, 2022, produced each year by the government, and gives us an overview on from our results and the BTO, the bird results, and a couple of other species. Uh, and then, of course, every 5 years we produce the State of the UK Butterflies. 2022 is the latest one. That's always worth a read if you want to know exactly what's happening. And the State of Nature report. This last year, 2025, was the 50th anniversary of UK BMS. It's nice to see that the um, original person who invented it, or Ernie uh, Pollard, is still alive and joined the call, um, and his transect is still going. But give you an idea, 8,000 sites have been covered since 1976. 5,500 volunteers have walked 1 million miles and counted 44.4 million butterflies. So how are we doing as the county? Well, it's good to report 116 transects. It's 84 transects were full transects, 18 of which were new or restarted. So another big effort this year in creating new or restarting old transects. We have a number of old transects which have been walked back in 10 years ago, extensively walked, but it's been dropped. We managed to get some of those going. Unfortunately, we do lose some every year because they're remote and we lose the walker. So we've lost 5. In terms of nationally, we're now 4th in the UK for our transects. We're actually on a par with Dorset, which I think is quite an achievement. So there's about 240 volunteers, and I know there's a good representation here. 45 of you are still on the call, 60 of whom were new again this year. I managed to train about 40 or so of those. I go out each April, well, usually the beginning of the season, and train groups of volunteers. We've walked 1,700 transect walks. We've covered 4,000 kilometers, and we've worked 3,000 hours of work. And interesting this year, you'll see the results there, how we've progressed since 2004. I think that graph speaks volumes for what we've done in these last recent years. But this one tells me a lot more. This is the regularity. And the green bars are where you've managed to walk more than 20 walks on your transect. And you can see for the first time ever, we are vastly in the majority. So that is down to you and the weather, of course. I have to admit the weather this year helped enormously to keep our regularity of walking. Um, but also, um, it's your commitment, which I mean, all I can say is just thank you, everyone. It's miraculous what you achieve every year. I put this one on because I just like to explain some of the landscapes that we're trying to cover in Yorkshire. I know Sharon talked a lot about landscapes, and here's how Natural England is divided up largely, the landscapes of Yorkshire, and how they also the number of spots which are all transects, how we're monitoring those landscapes. So some of the key landscapes, I'll just highlight with my mouse here, is here we have Ingleborough, which is a key site with about 6 or 7 transects on it. Um, each of these I've color coded according to what kind of habitat they are. So you see it's the Craven limestones here, and then you have the Grassington part of the Craven limestone, which is a really, really good landscape for butterflies, particularly the northern brown argus and other insects at grasswood and basto wood at Grassington. The other key butterfly area, again with the super rich calcareous grassland, is the Helmsley area. And there we have Hornby Hill, which is famous for the Duke of Burgundy butterfly. But also there's other ones along the Tabular Hills, which basically run from Helmsley along this edge, southern edge, where the rivers are cut through into the limestone, and you've got things like Ellerburn Bank, a number of other transects, Silpho Quarry. But there's lots of other wonderful butterfly sites, and you can see this line here. This is the magnesium limestone ridge that runs basically the course of the M1, and it's absolutely full of woodlands, beautiful woodlands in those deep valleys where the rivers have broken through to the Humber. Um, they've sliced through, made a gorge, exposed the limestone. Great for woodlands on those banks, like at Brocadale, which is a wonderful mixture of steep banks of woodland, and at the base you've got some wonderful calcareous grasslands. Um, then over here, Sean pointed out, which is our wetlands. This is Thorn Moors, which we have about 7 transects on there. The next, probably most important landscape where we don't have good coverage, but it's improving, is the Wolds. So we have Warham Quarry, Kipling Coats. We have a new one this year, Rifle Butts, thanks to Simon. I think he's on the call. And Fodden Chalk Bank up here. East Coast, the Holderness is not well represented, where we could improve, although this year we've got the Skern Wetlands, which is a Yorkshire Wildlife Site, has joined, which is great. Around York, we have a good variety of sites. Wet woodlands like my transect here, number 5, which is sorry, number 6, which is Bishopwood. We've got some representation now in Sheffield and Rotherham, where we have been very much lacking. So you begin to see the picture here that we're spreading out and getting much more coverage, and we're aiming for 7 sites for each of our landscapes to give us a good idea what's happening within landscapes. Now, next year, BC will actually analyze the results at the Yorkshire level. Until that day, I manually analyze them myself. Here's some of the names. You can find this on our website and under transects. They're hyperlinked. Each of the transects are hyperlinked. So if you click on any of these, then it takes you to a report on how that transect's been doing over the last 3 or 4 years. That's my since I've been trying to write reports for each of you, as far as I'm able to do. Now I have been ill this last year's, which has curtailed my activity. I managed to near enough complete it. It also classifies them by altitude. Because the other thing which is probably key to all this is Yorkshire has a huge range of altitude, and temperature goes down. For every 100 meters you go up, temperature goes down by 1 degree centigrade. So only you have to travel literally 2 miles to the magnesium limestone ridge, and the temperature plummets. And similarly, when I'm coming off the ridge, temperature shoots up. You see the same as you come off the North York Moors. This has profound effect on butterflies and their abundance, and we should never forget it's a very complicated picture. It's 200 miles across Yorkshire, so even the latitude is important for our butterflies. This is what one of the site reports looks like. I've chosen Hornby Hill because it's a very busy one. I hope you can all read it. You can see here typically all the if you add all the species together, it oscillates up and down. Here by a Mac, it's down at 250, then it's up at 1,000, and it's down at 400 last year in the miserable weather, and this year it's back up to nearly 800. This is very typical doubling, halving, or nearly an order of magnitude changes. You also see some of the graphs here of the different species. Duke and Burgundy, which is of course the critical species, very slowly going down, but not dramatically. Nothing to really panic about. This is the percentage change this year. So you see here at the bottom, for all the species, have increased this year by 14%. And you begin to see the families and which ones are suffering. You see here the Vanessids, the small tortoiseshell, etc. But lots of things gaining. Majority of species gaining, which is the story I'm going to tell next. This this view, I know it's rather small. I can't make it any more without being very incomplete. Shows all our transects across the top, all the species down the side here. And the important thing here is not all the names, etc., but just look at the coverage of where the orange, that's the top scoring site, is for any particular species, and the green squares are the second and the third places in that list, and they're scattered all over the place. Of course, everybody wants to know which site has the most butterflies, and for another year running, I think Alwyn's on the call, the owner of Forest of Flowers here, wins top place again. But his others are nipping at his heels, with Brocadale doing really well this year, and one of the St Aidan sites doing very well. That's RSPB, St Aidan's on the River Aire. So you might be able to pick out your sites in alphabetic order, and you might be able to see some of your sites. But I won't stay at it too long. It's too small to really read, so I'll move on. There is a bigger version on the website. If you want to go and see it, there is a bigger version, and then you can read it properly. So every year we choose a butterfly of the year. This year, for very good reason, it's a small copper. Um, over the last 30 years in Yorkshire, this butterfly has slowly been going down. It's been running negative almost every time. This year, it somehow, unbelievably, was 30 times more than last year, which happened to be its record low, to reach a record high. Twice as many as any other year so far. And it pushed it from being negative to being positive just in 1 year over a 30-year period. I would imagine a lot of you will probably agree with that. You saw loads on your transects. That's why I chose it. So in Yorkshire, we had 6 species had their best year in 20, and 10 more had their second best year in 20. However, there's a very north-south split across the UK. So Scotland had its best year ever recorded. So this is going back to the 1980s. While Northern England had its best year in 20, as we did. However, the South was about average. Even so, 60% of species were more than 30% up against their 10-year average. However, some of the browns really suffered, while some of the lysinids, that's the lysinids are the blues, the coppers, did really, really well. So very mixed bag. I want to show you this one again. I showed it to you last year. It's horribly complicated, but I'll break it down into bits. This is the historical context of what we're talking about. We're in a warming phase of a cycle. And within that warming, those cycles, we have lots of peaks and troughs, which you can see here, the blue lines. And this is the temperature. So it's the average summer temperature from 1884. Average summer temperatures give us an idea of how well butterflies are doing. And what you see is warming periods and cooling periods. At the moment, we're in a very long warming period, which has really been going on since we hit a minimum around about 63. The red line is the average of all these blue lines. And the reason I put all these peaks in is something interesting happens. We're in a period of return of species that used to live in Yorkshire. Up until the Industrial Revolution, Yorkshire's had a similar number of common species as they do today. But that's been in decline in bursts and ups and downs. But most of those have been quite small, and the returns have been quite small until we hit 1960. Well, in actual fact, the real rises didn't really happen until we hit this period here, which is around about the early 80s, 83, 84. You might remember being, if you're as old as me, back in 1979, and this great big dip here, people were talking about global cooling. Yeah, we all laugh now, but it felt very real at the time, having some of the coldest winters recorded. 1979, I remember falling in a snowdrift and was buried for some time. It was quite a cold period, but it was very short-lived. But you can see here we went from certainly volcanic activity has an effect on the cooling and warming of the world. Um, and we need to remember also that where we live, we're in the interglacial period, and that we're 15,000 years into that interglacial period. It started quite warm, it cooled, then we had warm spells, the Roman period when vines grew in the UK, and then it cooled again, the medieval cold spell. Hot and cold is not unusual, and it has a dramatic effect on our butterflies. But what's happened since 1983 has been a consistent rise, and you can see it here. From 83 onwards, it's been rising. And these peaks along here, you might pick out species over here. This is a return year where it became much more wide scale. So not the first insect seen, but when the insect began to really spread through Yorkshire. So you see things like the orange tip, Commonweal Garden, small skipper, 1970. Marble white really took off in the warm 75, 76 period here. The white letter hair streak, the brimstone, the gatekeeper, the ringlet, purple hair streak. These are all relatively new returning butterflies. And since the millennium, we have the Scotch Argus, which was an introduction, but it's actually now beginning to spread, and I think it counts as re-establishing itself. Silverwash Vitillaria, of course, Purple Emperor, which I'll talk about a bit later, and a new one for you, 2025. See, we have a peak on the graph, and we have yet another new species beginning to move in. Where will it end? I don't know. This, if you look at the European species that could live in our climate, there's about 60 species that could arrive in the UK. So yes, it's going to continue. So that's just setting the context of what we're going to talk about. The critical temperature where this all happens is when the average summer temperature is somewhere around about the 18.5 temperature, which is around about here, 1983. When you reach that point, it starts to increase. If it drops below that point, things begin to decrease. So this period from 49 onwards, um, we lost a lot of species, and now they're back. If you actually turn this into maths, we get one new species every 4 years since 1984. There's now twice as many common species in our back gardens as there used to be. I'll let you think about that because that's dramatic. Going to move on to the weather in 2025. I thought it was a bumpy year, um, and it couldn't be any more opposite than 2024. I can't remember a year where there was flight conditions almost every day from March right through to the beginning of August. I can't remember a year like that. This is the spring. It shows the orange shows where the daily temperatures were above the average, and the average is here in the middle. The periods when it was cooler, there was a short period in mid-March where it was a bit cooler, but we had an exceptionally warm beginning of March, which then returned towards the end of the month. And we had crazy things emerging. And that's the summer. It's a similar picture. With June again hitting new records in the middle of June. Then in the middle of July we hit a new record. And then even in the middle of August, it was very close to a record. And how little blue there is where it dropped below. Many of our spring species were nearly 2 to 3 weeks earlier. And many of the earliest records were broken. Well, many of us were recording sometimes summertime numbers on our transects. I remember recording 100 plus insects quite regularly on my transect. I hope you did something similar. It was quite exceptional, the numbers. Just to give you an idea, March was 1.2 above the normal, April 1.7, May 2.2. The last occurrence of similar conditions was back in 1976, that really stinking hot year. Other insects were going crazy too. You might remember aphids, which smothered our roses at amazing speed. And even in March, they were beginning to invade our rose bushes. And of course, they're followed by the ladybirds. And I know I'm still evicting large numbers of ladybirds from the house right now. We know June is a critical month because uh, the insects are entering their final instar, so they're big, they're juicy, they're big meals for a bird, and they enter the pupal stage, which they have no protection really. They're just hanging there or sitting there as a pupae for hungry birds to pick off. June was nearly 3 degrees above the normal, and July nearly 4 degrees above the normal. June, we really began to see the effects of the severe drought. The ground cracked, the hay crops failed, the verges went yellow, the sward, the grass sward. I never cut my lawn for about 6 weeks, but luckily we had a few days in May, and again we had an inch of rain overnight in early July. Our lawns greened back up. This did not happen in the south of England, which continued to bake, and I think that's the important difference between our results that we see and south of us. Even so, 2025 was the third hottest year after 2023, and then 2024 was second hottest. But that's because there was a very warm winter. So overall, this is correct, but still 2024 was the coolest summer in a decade. I'm going to look now at emergence because I'm the chap who fills in the first sightings page on the website, and you might have spotted it. This is last year, and I want you to focus on this column here. This is the number of, if it's positive, it's the days, how many days earlier than the norm for every species. So you've got the 2025 here. And for example, comma was seen on 14th of January, 20-year average was 15th of February, 23 days early. Uh, but most of February was a pretty awful month from memory. It wasn't until March that things really began to change. And you begin to see it here at the beginning of March. And suddenly things are coming out really, really early, 3 weeks early, nearly a holly blue, nearly a month early. Um, and then we had a slight dip with that cooler spell in the middle of March, and it dipped back, but then more species came out. And even once you got to May, you had species coming out nearly more than 3 weeks, nearly 4 weeks early. I think this year things are already early, by the way. No orange tip yet, but that green hair streak and orange tip are the next two species to be spotted. Let's just think about this a little bit more. So this is how the number of species have varied through the years. So the number of species that emerged by the end of April, you can see 2025 was up here, 22 species by the end of April. We actually had 30 species by the end of May, 30 species on the wing, including marble whites and silver wash fritillaries in May. How crazy is that? So you can see there that as the years have gone by, the number of species that are on the wing have steadily increased. The season is getting longer, and it's around about 2 to 3 weeks longer. Below that is the species emergence date. So how that's calculated, so we take the dates from here, and this is the day number, the year day number. So this is the day number of in the year. To allow you can't compare dates, but you can compare day numbers. So you can see here the average emergent dates have moved earlier 12 days over the last 20 years. And now another 5 species are now regularly seen up to the end of May. So if we look why, the graph below here illustrates the spring temperature. Obviously, it bounces up and down, and yeah, it does rise slightly. It's risen slightly about 0.7 degrees over the last 20 years, but it doesn't appear to follow much of a pattern until you look at the temperature versus the emergence state. And suddenly you have a highly significant relationship. So this is the significance here, R squared. And you can see here that's 2025, that's 2011, next warmest. And you begin to see here that that is a very, very strong, significant line. It just illustrates how incredibly sensitive the response of butterflies are to our warming world. It's just taken 0.7 degrees centigrade change to cause all this. They are remarkable. Just like Attenborough says, they're the canary in the cage. They really are. And I think this is proof of how sensitive they are. And what you really want to know is how well our species did this last year. So here's some remarkable numbers again. I've never had numbers like this before, and so many positive ones. So the all species index is up 30% compared with the average for the last 5 years. That's the headline figure. So, but compared with last year, we're 90% up on last year. It was a disaster. Sorry, that says 2025. It should say 2024. Nearly half our species were up more than 50%. So 50% is somewhere around about here. Another remarkable fact. I can just explain some of the real winners. So the real winners, obviously small copper, we know, we've talked about it. The next big winner, green hair streak, had a cracking year. And of course, the large white, bolstered by huge numbers of migrants. Purple hair streak, green vein white, had a cracking year after its worst year ever last year. Brown Argus had a terrible year last year. Very good year this year. Small white again, it helped by migrants. Dingy skipper, great year. Peacock, better. It's coming back after a few years of doldrums. Silverwash Fritillary, after that horrible year last year, bounced back. Comma, speckled wood, up 40-50%. Dark green Fritillary, which has had a shocking time just recently, bounced back. Common blue, been having a shocking time for years, bounced back. The UK results also suggest the common blue and brown Argus really did well, and the small copper really did well nationally. They love the short sward where the sun can get right down to the host plants, so the eggs get really nice and warm. The larvae are really warm, and that's the reason why they've really gone potty, and why they did so badly last year, because it was the complete opposite. Obviously, on the negative side, Holly Blue is in a period of recovery because it's had a peak. If you look at the 5-year average, 5 years ago, it was very much at a peak, and now it's slowly working its way back. This coming season, expect it to come back greatly. Small tortoiseshell, interesting one. Like this year, you probably noticed more people are seeing small tortoiseshells this year than last year. Last year we saw a few, and they had a pretty good first generation. But then with the heat and the drought, they pretty much didn't have a second generation at all. So very much everything up for grabs. They can respond really quickly. Both the peacock and the tortoiseshell go through big cycles. Meadow brown was actually one of the species because it is down. And of course, that's important because it's our most numerous species. And just that little red dot there has a big effect on the overall numbers across our transects because it's such an important species, as is ringlet, which also just managed positive, but it's overall it had a profound effect of being very average in what was an exceptional year. And the reason, of course, is their food plant shriveled. The grasses had a shocking time. Farmers didn't make any hay because there wasn't anything to make. This one, I hope you can read some of it. This is actually quite interesting because it begins to reveal what's actually happening. This is the change in each of our transect sites. At the top, we have Fen Bog, a number of other sites, Crook site, which is on Ingleborough, north side of Ingleborough, Souther Scales, which is also on the north side of Ingleborough, East Park Hull, which is obviously in the middle of Hull, Halwath, which is on near Ripon on the riverside, Sprutford Flash, which is on the riverside of the River Aire, Don, I mean, Hipperley Beck, which is obviously on the beck. You probably noticed there all these doing really well. A lot of them are associated with water. They really benefited in the drought because they had plenty of water. And that's certainly also the case when you go a bit further down, you see some of the woodlands begin to shine. Brocadale, which is actually quite a dry site, but it has a huge amount of woodland. And it's those woodland butterflies that have done particularly well. Now, our best site last year, the only one site that went up is here, Warren Quarry, which this year is the site that went down the most. Now, if you're familiar with Warren Quarry, it's just a load of old rock. It's as dry as sticks. Threshfield, which is also another quarry. Malham, which is limestone pavement. Priory Fields, which is a field, I think a sandy a field outside Hull. Top of Ingleborough. Pickup, which is a site on Fairburn Ings. St Aidan's Hillside, which is next door on the St Aidan's site, which is a sandy site. Roach Hills, which is at the top of the magnesium limestone. Duck Street Quarry, which is also a great big lump of rock. Can you see the picture beginning to emerge here of what's happened? Is the really dry ones suffered, the really wet ones, a good many of them really benefited. We've never had a difference between sites as strong as this year. So we have a strong pattern of drought interacting with the soil type, especially the thin limestone and sandy soils. Very much the opposite of the disastrous wet year of last. Yeah. So summarizing, huge difference between sites, mostly from drought and soil type. A large number of damp grasslands, hedgerows, and woodlands benefited, some of them hugely. That's this lot in here. You'll notice lots of woodland sites here and hedgerows. Yeah, and a very small number of thin chalk and sandy sites did do worse than last year. So it's not all, as I tried to make out with Annus Mirabilis, it's not all a miracle. It's a right mixture. I want to show you this one again. This shows how summers affect butterflies. And here we're looking from 1990 onwards. The blue line is the temperature and the green line is the abundance of our butterflies. And you can see a very clear pattern of correlation between temperature and abundance. Now, the abundance scale is from 200 right down here to 1300 up here. So almost a factor of 6 compared with temperature, which is only a factor of a couple of degrees. So a small change here has a big effect on temperature. Where does this year fit? 21.6 is the highest record we have of temperature, and incidentally is also our highest record, very, very close to 2013, 2014. Extremely sunny years. This year was not a hugely sunny year, but it was hot. But it also compares with that stinking hot 95, 96, which I think is probably the most comparable year. So the pattern continues. It's almost like we can predict what's going to happen to them. So over this period, that rise has only been 0.7, but the abundance has increased 27%, and it follows the temperature. At the same time, the rainfall has increased 27%. We are getting wetter summers, don't we know? Flooding, etc. Number of rainy days are increasing, but we're also getting slightly more sunshine, not hugely. Those are some of the best years, and there's some of the worst years. Our best years, we should have put 2025 in there. I haven't, but 2014 was the next. 2023 here, that peak. 1995 here. 2019 here, and 2006, which is here. I put this in. This gives a
Sorry,
really,
Nick,
yeah,
do you think it would be worth moving on to some of the introductions soon
yes.
when you can?
I shall speed up. Thank you, Beth. I kick up the bottom. But I wanted to show you this. How's the time? Right. This gives you a real good overview of what's happening um, overall. So here you'll see the trend in the abundance and how the UK, how Yorkshire compares to the UK is remarkably similar, but there are some differences. Here you see the best year for each species. Notice this year we have 5 species which are best: brown hargus, speckled wood, dingy skipper, large white, small copper. But second best, even more. So there's 11 had their second best year. And this is the UK best year. Obviously, I haven't got the 2025 results because they're not published yet, but it gives you an idea of which are the best years. And then the York worst year, and you see highlighted 2024 last year. How many of those species that stood at the bottom here had their worst year ever? Taking the hint from Beth, I'm moving on now. But I think that really gives you, in a few numbers, a pretty good overview of what's happening to our species. So, a new species to watch out for: large tortoiseshell. Now, this species is official; it's no longer extinct. It became extinct in the 1950s during the cool spell I told you about. In combination with Dutch elm disease, which is a food plant, it's now becoming not an uncommon species along the south coast from Kent all the way to Cornwall. And in Holland, interestingly, the large tortoiseshell now is becoming more common than the small tortoiseshell. Gives you a clue which way we're traveling. This is what it looks like. It's a big butterfly. It's about the size of a peacock. Um, it's found in woods and along hedgerows with scattered sallow and wych elm in in Yorkshire at least. It's seen in March. It's at around about its peak about now, end of March. You often see it on flowering sallow in woodlands. It breeds on elm, but also on willow, and it emerges in July. Now, a strange thing happened to me this July. I was walking down um, Pocklington Canal, just south of the town, and I was watching for elm trees in the in the hedgerows around the canal. It's a really old hedgerows, and there's quite a lot of willow and there's quite a lot of elms. And out of nowhere, this very large orange insect, which I couldn't recognize, was flying around me in circles, up and down the canal, circling me until it's just suddenly disappeared. All I can tell you is it was a dull orange color, and it didn't land, so I can't be positive about the identification. But it didn't fit anything I knew, and I count thousands and thousands of butterflies every year. So how do you identify it? Well, you got to get lucky and have it landed, I think, to be absolutely sure. Um, it's a much larger butterfly than the small tortoiseshells. The males patrol. They go very fast, back and forth, uh, and they are a dull shade of orange in flight, rather than the reddish orange of a small tortoiseshell. This is exaggerated. This is a very fresh specimen, and this orange is exaggerated. This is more the orange of a large tortoiseshell. How do we tell? Well, here at this spot, small tortoiseshell only has 2 dots, these two. Large tortoiseshell has 4 dots. The orange crescents around the edge are very small, not really conspicuous at all. And the dark area on a small tortoiseshell, which normally occupies this area, is absent. So yeah, if you see something that's big, orange, is noticeably different from a small tortoiseshell, see if you can follow it and catch it when it lands. I'm sure it's in um, um, Yorkshire because they have been seen in previous years, not in big numbers, ones and twos, usually in March and again later in the summer. So I think it's probably here. It only takes us to find it. So one to watch, particularly if you have old, if you're in woodland or have old hedgerows, etc. Here's the new species. It's called the southern small white. It's a butterfly associated with gardens and allotments, but also along coastal and rocky wastelands. Its food plant is usually perennial candy tuft, but also wall, sometimes called wild rocket, which is grown commercially to put on in your salad. Both these plants are very common in the UK. And the first ones were seen along the coast. The first one, I think, was in Suffolk. The second one was in Durham. They're coming across from probably Holland, Germany, etc. It first moved into Northern Europe, Switzerland, around about 2008, and then got into Holland about 2018, and has spread rapidly since. It's reached the Danish border, which means really you would think its UK should now be suitable. It has three broods. This is what you see in the picture is a typical spring brood butterfly, and the arrows show what makes it different. So the spring one has this dusting of black scales across the wings. See the arrow one, so over here, and the apical patch here. This bit, and you know how important tips are with whites. It spreads down about 30% down each side, so it's equal both sides. And it spreads down just so it touches this apical spot here, discal spot there. So it's approximately in line. This spot is big. Some people call it the big square spot white because this spot is the most noticeable feature. And it's not round like all the other whites, and it's more squarish. In fact, the side that faces the outside is concave quite often, but it's often inconclusive. Sometimes there's this additional spot in the middle of the hindwings, which would be quite unique. No other white has it, but it is very pale. The most noticeable thing is the outer wing margin is curved. This curve here, and this curve here is much rounder and compared to the straighter margin of the small white. And we're going to look at that a bit later on. In fact, we have a quiz for you when we finish to test your knowledge of whites. Here's the summer version. As I say here at the bottom, it's spread through Holland. It's traveling around about 70 kilometers per year. It's not in big numbers, even in Holland, where it's widespread and common. It's only 1% of the small whites. And in Germany, of interest, it's now using garlic mustard, which of course is very common in the UK, and it's becoming much less fussy about its food. So this is a summer, much more darker marked, like all the whites are darker marked in the second broods. The discal spot is still large, square, concave. Sometimes it spills over the veins into the surrounding area. So I've got some ID tips for you. This is the important bit. So the most important thing is it's smaller than a small white. And the jizz, I've talked about jizz with you before. The character of its flight is very much more wood white. If you've ever seen a wood white, it's a very slow, dainty, flapping. And you see, when it's flying, you'll see how rounded the wings are and those prominent square spots. tend to catch your attention. So we really want you to look out for this. I'm sure it's coming. If you see something suspicious, get a photo. To absolutely nail whether it's a southern small white, you have to find an egg and raise the larvae. The first and second end stars have black heads. When do we expect to see them? It's normally the third brood is the biggest and the very mobile brood, which is in August. And that's the time you're most likely to see it. In fact, there was a report from Spurn Point. I looked at the picture and I said to the guy, I think that's a southern small white. And Spurn would just fit perfectly with being in the right location. Just to help you a little bit more, the southern small white, here we compare it with the large small and the green veined. So as you know, the large white, that tip wraps around and it goes lower than the spot. The southern small white, it's exactly in line with the spot. The small white, it's above the spot. And the green vein, again, it's these streaks which go below the spot. So you're looking for that line from the top of the spot across here. That is one of your best clues. This is a food plant. It's common, wild rocket or wall rocket. That's how it grows. Grows out of a wall, believe it or not. And of course, it's also known as arugula, which of course is what we stick on our pizza. But the wild one is really, really spicy. And it's grown in allotments, which I think accounts for its occurrence. Is it gardens and allotments because of the food plants? Now, the purple emperor. This is a female purple emperor. The reason it's on here is we had more observations of the purple emperor this last year. We're reaching the point now it's breaking through and people begin to notice it. I think it's probably all over the place, and it just needs us. I mean us because we've got the best skills to spot it. So let's talk a little bit about its habits and where we like to see it. So it's a butterfly of heavy clay, wet, older woodlands with oak and sallow. It's spreading north rapidly. So it came into Sherwood forests around about 2016, 2017, and it came into Derbyshire and into Yorkshire. The first one was seen in Yorkshire in 2022. Nothing was seen last year in common with other areas, but they're back this year. So in 2025, 4 were seen. One of them at Sprokeborough Flash, which is in exactly the right place you would expect to see it. It's quite near Potterick Car. Lots of food plant with the sallows and some old oak trees. Interestingly, and very unusually, it's feeding on buddleia. For a butterfly that almost never takes nectar, we saw it on buddleia, and 2 of those records were photographs of purple emperors on buddleia, which in itself is incredibly unusual. You have to conclude that it's probably already widespread and the population level is just at the point that being noticed. And that's simply because it's such an elusive butterfly that can exist for many years and not be noticed because it spends most of its time perched up on treetops. But I'm going to give you a whole list of tips. So this is a food plant, goat willow, sallow, which is the wide-leaved sallow. And then you have the grey willow or pussy willow, which obviously is still flowering presently, which has the narrow leaves. Now, these 2 species interbreed like crazy, so you get everything in between in a right mixture of colours and widths of leaves. The emperor tends to prefer the goat willow rather than the grey, but it doesn't really care a lot. It's looking for a location. To help you with your IDing, is know the timetable of your insect. So the males begin to emerge in mid-July. They become active early in the morning. So just 8 o'clock, just as it begins to warm up, between 8 and 9, you will often be on the ground of the forest path. Usually, like this one here, this would probably taken at that period. It will probably be taking nourishment from the dampness left over from the dew on the ground. From 9 o'clock onwards, the males start patrolling. They're flying up and down lines of salad bushes. They're trying to flush out females. This is the time you're likely to see them flying. It's a very big black butterfly. Even if you're seeing it from underneath, it's a big black butterfly with these white stripes. It's like nothing else you will see for size, color, and the definition of those white stripes. They're equally visible from below. So that's what you're looking for in that period, but that only lasts a couple of hours. By 11, they begin to take up its perch, and on the master tree or their preferred tree. Now, quite often in a wood, they'll have a preferred area they go to, often with a master tree, where they'll lek together. It's usually the most prominent. From there, they jump on anything. Females up to the size of red kites. They are ruthless thugs. So that's the purple emperor. The most likely places you like to see them, and we do have records from Maltby Common, but unconfirmed records, but I'm sure it's there. Potterick Car has got to be my favourite place, or Sprotbrough. Where to next? Well, there's loads of woods to choose from when you break into the Vale of York, wet woodlands, clays. There's loads of choice. Okay, we're going to talk now very briefly on the new transects. I don't know if there's anybody on the call from Yorkshire Water, but we've had a number of sites join us from there. If there's anybody from Yorkshire Water on the call, please let yourself know now. So just unmute yourself because we'd love to know more about it. If you're not here, don't worry. No. Another site which has come on this year is Emsay Reservoir. Yorkshire Water are doing a big push to measure the biodiversity on their sites and have chosen to take up transects. I was lucky enough to train a large number of volunteers this last spring, and I'd be training more this year. So Clifton Backes is an old airfield just north of York, Clifton Moor, World War II. But it still has the old medieval ridge and furrows there. It's now a local nature reserve. It was surveyed back in the 90s for about 15 years, and then it ceased. I presume the person doing it ceased, but now we have a new person. I think Martin. Is Martin on the call? No, no. Foxglove Covert, which has had a transect in the past. It's had a bit of a relaunch and a remake of its route, and is being a bit more regularly walked now. I don't know if anybody's on the line. No. Rifle Butts Quarry. I think Simon. I saw Simon earlier. Rifle Butts Quarry is just south of Kipling Coast, the Yorkshire Wildlife Site. It's very tiny. It's a postage stamp size, but its importance is not only archaeological because of it's got a fascinating some geological formation inside the quarry, but also there's limestone calcareous grasslands around it. And I think Simon wants to extend extend it up the Hudson Way and link up with the car park at Kipling Coast to make it into a bit more interesting transect with loads of dingy skippers along that old railway line. Scone Wetlands looks like a fantastic site. It's wet. It's in the north, just on the edge of the Yorkshire Wolds, just south of Driffield, another Yorkshire Wildlife site. I don't know if the lady who walks it's on the line. No. Okay. Skipwith Hall, which is a private gardens close to where I live. It's Skipwith. Lady of the Manor is walking it herself and getting some quite fabulous species. Thornybank Farm is on the Wolds in Numbenholm, just over the hill from Kipling Coates. It's a farm, but it's organic and grown very sensitively for butterflies. And the owners, old farmer, is very keen on his butterflies. So he's started that one. That's Martin. Top Hill Low is another Yorkshire water site. They've developed three transects that cover different reservoirs. They're interesting because these are very wet, quite wet sites, and you get things like the tortoiseshell. Um, Even though you're down in the lowlands where tortoiseshells really don't thrive anymore, it's too hot, too dry. These wet sites are reservoirs for small tortoiseshell population. Oak Hill Farm, which is a Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust new transect, one of their new projects up on the coal measures on the edge of the moorland. Is being reverted to biodiversity from farmland. It's quite an interesting site. It has war, small heath. Could be a very interesting transect. And then Ricketts Wood, which is in the one of the steep valleys. I forget. Sheffield has 7 rivers, which makes it complicated, but I can't remember which river it is. One of the rivers is on the banks of that. Coming next year, I'm hoping High Rowans at Sheriff Hutton, Canclow Woods, which is just outside Rotherham, and Foss Park Hospital, which is the grounds of York, one of the York hospitals, will be joining us. I don't know if anybody on the line for any of them. I'm not sure. Maybe not. Okay. Okay, we're coming up to the end of the presentation, so I'll move on. And I don't know if anybody has put any species they want me to try and help them with, but we'll cover that very shortly. But just a reminder of the different things we're looking for when we're trying to identify a species. The first and foremost one that we want to look at, the ground color. I was talking about the large tortoiseshell, looking for that dull orange rather than the bright orangey red of a small tortoiseshell. The other thing that often shows up is the spots. Think of the browns, all those spots were quite often critical in identifying species. Or the vernicids, the different spots and arrangements on the vernicids. Wingtips and borders, the whites is where it all happens. You identify that's how you identify the whites. Then you got the bands, like the bands on the Red Admiral, etc. The behavior, we talked a bit about that earlier, about how it flies. The wood white's got to be the slowest, quaintest, daintiest little species you could meet. And then probably the most elegant of our species has to be the swooping, gliding flight of a fritillary, which some people never forget. It's just so gorgeous. The other thing, of course, time of year. If it's out of their flight period, you should always be aware of the flight period of your species, the habitat where it's flying. As you change habitats, species will change. you move from small whites out in the open to green vein whites as soon as you move into the woodlands. And of course, the size. Now, I want to do a quiz. So it's a very, very last thing we'll do. And I want you to write for each numbered here the species that you think it is. Now, this was something that Alison was going to do, but Alison's in the background. She's going to figure out your results and let you know. But her microphone is playing up tonight, so she can't speak. But what do you think that is? And I'm going to spend 1 second on each of these. So be ready. It's 1 to 6. So if you'd like to write down in chat now what you think number 1 was, but then don't press the return key, wait for the next one. What do you think that is? Number 2. What do you think that is? Number 3. What do you think that is? Number 4. What do you think that one is? Number 5. And what do you think that one is? Number 6. So I'm going to look at the answers if I can find them. My chat box has disappeared. Typically, what's happened to it? You're going to have to help me, Alison. How are we doing on the results? I'm going to give you, work back through it now and tell you the results. Go back to number 1. The large white. Number 2, small white. Number 3, brimstone. Number 4, green vein white. Number 5, southern small white. Number 6, orange tip. So this I just put in as our last slide. This is a quick reminder of our different whites, how we identify them. So that large white here, see how that tip, it goes all the way around down the side. Same with the male and the female. So you got males over here, females over here. Generally, females have 2 spots and males have 1 spot, although that's not true for the small white. So that's the large white. Then the small white, you see, it's just the top edge. It does not extend down the side. It's just across the top. The green vein white, it wraps around, it has these threads pulling in from the side. And the veins, you can see the veins, they're marked in black. In the summer generation, like over here with the female with the 2 spots, it's very distinct. In the spring, like now, there can be almost no black color at all, just a faint color on the tip. But you know, if you look at the underside, obviously the green vein white is quite easy, but you don't often get that view. The orange tip, you got the checkerboard around the edge, and the wings are very round, more like the more round than even the southern small white. And that black spot is directly along the top edge, directly in the middle, and very black. You can even see it when it's flying. and see how rounded the black mark is. I know whites always give you the biggest problems, and I can't see the chat, but my colleagues will correct me. Um, any other issues or any other questions? Back to you, Beth.
The only comment I saw was yes about the whites. I've not yet seen any questions, but
Okay, we'll hang on a few minutes in case there are any questions. How are we doing on the quiz?
oh, a comment that it's a lot easier when they don't start flying around.
I think yeah, you just got to be honest with whites is to use the proportion system. In other words, as you see one sat, always make sure you identify it. And then as you see more, you get a percentage of which species it is. In between that, you have to use either the proportion. So if you're getting 50% small, 50% green vein, you know if you've just seen a small white, there's a 50% chance the next one's going to be a green vein, and the one after that a small, and the one after that green vein. And that's the only practical way of doing it. It has to be by intelligent guess. Large whites, your guesswork is generally a bit better because it's a bigger insect. Orange tip is generally a smaller species and flies in a different place. In other words, it's going to be usually close to woodlands, close to its food plant. And green vein white will invariably be quite close to shade, while the other species will be out in the open. So remember those tips. Identify everything that you possibly can if it lands. Usually you don't always get the chance to see the underside, which is why I haven't bothered showing you undersides. You get top sides and you've got to make your best judgment. And I think this slide probably is the most useful. So watch out for the southern small white, that big square spot. You notice nothing on this screen looks anything like it. Let's have a look. You see here, this is the closest, the female small white, but there's no line here, and that is most definitely more round than square.
Tips for Essex skipper, Nick.
Oh, I wish I had some more tips for Essex skipper. It's got to be the most tricky one. I tend to is later, so dates are important. So you first see the small skippers, and then 10 days later, usually the first Essex appear. If you get the opportunity and you're in a position to just duck your head down and just look underneath the insect and look at those antennae tips, even or you can get in front of it and actually duck your head down and look at those tips. If it looks like dunked in ink, the tip of the antenna is an Essex, almost pretty much guaranteed. The big problem is elderly small skippers, quite often the tips go from pale to quite dark brown, and it's a pain to tell them the difference. The habitat is slightly different. The Essex tends to fly in longer grass, which is its habit, but then you also get plenty of small skippers in the same place. It does have a difference in its jizz, in that it is smaller, and flies in a different way. Again, the only way, and I haven't managed to do it, is to see enough of them to see the jizz, which takes a while for the numbers to build up on a site. There's only a few sites in Yorkshire where they are in big numbers and are recorded frequently. At the moment, the best place to go and see them is probably Paul Strays, just on the other side of Hull. They have loads of them. I think that's possibly the best place to see them. Crocodile has a few, but they're tricky to spot. Sorry, I can't be more helpful. perhaps when I've learned the jizz skill, then I'll be able to give you a better answer. But the only way at the moment is to look at those antennae tips.
And Wendy from the new Transect at Ugill Farm has commented about how it's an upland farm, so it can be really hard to find the right weather, and nearly
God,
always
yes.
got some wind on the higher parts.
You have done extremely well, Wendy, to get almost a full set of results last year, I have to admit. And it's a very interesting site. I look forward to seeing your results this year. It's quite an exciting project, I'm sure. But yeah, as far as I understand, Wendy, you're very welcome to join me and describe it. But as I understand it, it's you are regenerating the original grasslands from being a farmland, using cattle and other means, as I understand it. But feel free to join the conversation. Alison, can you give us a view on the Hi, Wendy. I can see your picture. You just turn your
Yes,
microphone
I
on.
don't know if my microphone is working, but we do have quiz winners. So we have joint winners, 4 people, got all of them correct. So Steph,
Excellent.
Julia, Ian, and Simon.
Excellent. Wendy, do you want to speak? Unmute you might. I'll unmute you, shall I? Do you want to speak?
There is a comment in the chat just saying can't get the microphone to work, unfortunately.
Okay. Can you hear? Talk to us, Wendy. No, no, your microphone's on, but it's not working. Sorry, Wendy. We'd love to hear from you next time. Okay, so shall we pause the recording, Beth? And anybody got any burning questions? You're very welcome.